Subscribe if you hate Karens and comment what country and city you're watching from. I, George Cooper, a man in my early 30s, had always prided myself on being a good neighbor. I kept my lawn manicured, always waved hello, and even helped Mrs. Henderson carry her groceries in from time to time. I believe in community and looking out for one another. Up until recently, everyone seemed to share that sentiment. Everyone, that is, except for Karen. Karen lived next door, a woman old enough to know better, a walking stereotype of entitlement and unwarranted suspicion. From the moment I moved in, she treated me with a barely concealed disdain, a constant undercurrent of judgment. At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured she was just set in her ways, maybe a little lonely. I even offered to help her with her yard work once, a gesture that was met with a frosty stare and a mumbled, "I prefer to handle things myself." The subtle digs escalated over time. Complaints about my music being too loud, even though I rarely listened to anything above a reasonable volume. Accusations of blocking her driveway, even though I parked perfectly within my own lines, and the constant watchful eyes peering from behind her curtains. I tried to kill her with kindness, but my efforts were consistently met with negativity. My one real indulgence, and the thing that truly irritated Karen, was my jacuzzi. I'd saved up for years to afford it. It was my sanctuary, my escape after long days at the construction site. I meticulously maintained it, keeping the water crystal clear and the surrounding deck spotless. Karen, I knew, resented it. I could see the envy in her eyes whenever I was out there, relaxing after a long day. She'd make little passive-aggressive comments about how some people have too much free time or how water bills these days are outrageous. I'd installed security cameras around my property, partly for general security and partly because of Karen. I had a feeling she was the type to try something, and I wanted to be prepared. Little did I know how right I would be. The day started like any other. I kissed my wife, Sarah, goodbye as she left for work. I was heading to a job site about an hour away, bracing myself for another long, hard day. I had no idea that Karen was about to cross a line so egregious, so utterly disrespectful, that it would finally push me to the edge. I left for work, naively believing my home, my sanctuary, would remain undisturbed. How wrong I was. The morning went by in a blur of blueprints, heavy lifting, and the relentless summer sun. I was covered in dust and sweat, already aching in places I didn't know existed. Around lunchtime, I decided to take a break and check my security cameras on my phone. It was a habit I developed, a way to reassure myself that everything was all right at home. I scrolled through the feeds, expecting to see nothing more than the swaying branches of the trees in my yard and the occasional passing car. That's when I saw it. My jaw dropped. My blood ran cold. There on my phone screen in crystal clear HD was Karen and a group of her cronies, lounging in my jacuzzi. My jacuzzi. The jacuzzi that I had worked so hard to afford. The jacuzzi that I meticulously maintained. The jacuzzi that she clearly felt entitled to. They were laughing, drinking out of what looked like wine glasses, and generally treating my backyard like their own private resort. I could see Karen, perched on the edge of the tub, gesturing expansively as she regaled her friends with a story. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their smug expressions told me everything I needed to know. They were reveling in their audacity, in their blatant disregard for my property and my privacy. Rage, cold, burning fury, washed over me. It was one thing to be annoying, to be judgmental, to make snide remarks. It was another thing entirely to trespass on my property and treat it like your own. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a deliberate act of disrespect, a blatant violation. I felt my hands clench into fists. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tear something apart. But I knew I couldn't let my anger consume me. I needed to think clearly, to act strategically. This wasn't just about the jacuzzi anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about setting boundaries, about finally putting an end to Karen's reign of entitlement. I immediately called Sarah. "You won't believe what's happening," I said, my voice tight with suppressed anger. I quickly explained the situation, and I could hear the incredulity in her voice that slowly changed to anger. "Get home, George," she said firmly. "Deal with this. I have your back." Her support solidified my resolve. I knew what I had to do. I bolted from the job site, offering a mumbled excuse to my bewildered coworkers. I practically flew down the highway, my foot pressing harder and harder on the accelerator. Every minute felt like an eternity. The images from the security camera replayed in my mind, fueling my anger and solidifying my determination. I envisioned their faces when I arrived, their smug expressions turning to shock and dismay. As I sped down the highway, I formulated a plan. I knew I couldn't just confront them head-on. I needed leverage, something that would make them regret ever stepping foot on my property. And then it hit me, Brutus. Brutus was my Rottweiler, a magnificent animal, fiercely loyal and incredibly protective. He was a gentle giant with my family, especially with Sarah, who he adored, but he was also an excellent guard dog. He hadn't been socialized with strangers, and he had a powerful bark that could send chills down anyone's spine. I kept him in a large, secure kennel in the backyard when I wasn't home, where he had plenty of space to run and play. Normally, I would never intentionally put anyone in a position where they might be frightened or harmed by Brutus, but Karen had left me with no choice. She had disrespected my property, violated my privacy, and pushed me to the edge. This was about sending a clear message: you don't mess with George Cooper. I called Sarah again, asking her to meet me at home early, explaining the next part of the plan. She understood and agreed, the tone of her voice hinting that she was equally furious. Near my exit, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I was ready to reclaim my home, to confront Karen, and to finally put an end to her reign of terror. The tires screeched slightly as I pulled into my driveway. I parked the truck at a slight angle, blocking Karen's car in the process, just to add to the effect. I took a deep breath, steeled my nerves, and prepared to confront the invaders in my jacuzzi. I reached into the glove compartment and grabbed a pair of thick work gloves. This was going to be interesting. I quietly approached the back gate, listening to the sounds of laughter and splashing coming from the jacuzzi area. They were still there, still oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I unlocked the gate, careful not to make any noise, and slipped inside. The scene that greeted me only fueled my anger. Karen and her friends were lounging in my jacuzzi, drinks in hand, completely at ease. They had even brought towels, which were carelessly draped over my patio furniture. It was as if they had taken complete ownership of my backyard. I took another deep breath and walked towards Brutus's kennel. The moment he saw me, his ears perked up and his tail started wagging furiously. He knew something was up. "Easy, boy," I whispered, unlocking the gate to his kennel. "It's showtime." As soon as the gate was open, Brutus bounded out, full of energy and excitement. He was a magnificent sight, his black and tan coat gleaming in the sunlight. I removed his leash and pointed towards the jacuzzi. "Show them what you think of trespassers, boy." Brutus needed no further encouragement. He let out a deafening bark, a deep guttural sound that echoed through the yard. He started barking and frothing at the mouth and ran towards the jacuzzi with a ferocious intensity. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The laughter stopped abruptly. The splashing ceased. Karen and her friends turned towards Brutus, their faces frozen in shock and terror. Their eyes widened in disbelief as the huge Rottweiler charged towards them, barking with unrestrained fury. They scrambled out of the jacuzzi, their faces etched with pure panic. Wine glasses were dropped, towels were abandoned, and the air was filled with screams. The scene was chaotic and utterly satisfying. Karen and her friends, clad in their bathing suits and dripping wet, scrambled to escape Brutus. They tripped over patio furniture, stumbled over each other, and shrieked in terror as the Rottweiler relentlessly pursued them. Karen, her face a mask of horror, was the slowest of the group. She struggled to her feet, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Brutus, sensing her vulnerability, focused his attention on her, barking and snarling at her heels. The other women, fueled by adrenaline, managed to reach the fence separating my yard from Karen's. They clambered over it, their dignity completely abandoned in their desperate flight. Karen, however, was not so lucky. She reached the fence, but her arthritic hands struggled to grip the wooden slats. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers trembling with fear. Brutus, sensing his prey was cornered, intensified his barking. He lunged at the fence, his powerful body straining against the barrier. Karen screamed, high-pitched, piercing sound that echoed through the neighborhood. Finally, with a desperate heave, she managed to unlatch the gate and stumble through, collapsing in a heap on her own property. I approached Brutus, who was still barking and growling at the fence. "Good boy," I said, patting him on the head. "You did a great job." He wagged his tail, clearly pleased with himself. I leashed him and led him back towards his kennel, his barking gradually subsiding as we moved away from the scene of the Jacuzzi massacre. As I secured Brutus back in his kennel, I couldn't help but smile. The look on Karen's face as she fled my backyard was priceless. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. I knew that she would never, ever trespass on my property again. I surveyed the scene of the crime. My jacuzzi was a mess littered with abandoned towels, spilled drinks, and shattered glass. The patio furniture was askew, and the air was thick with the scent of chlorine and fear. But despite the disarray, I felt a sense of calm. I had reclaimed my home, asserted my boundaries, and sent a clear message to Karen. Sarah arrived shortly after, her face etched with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Oh my God, George," she said, surveying the scene. "What happened here?" I recounted the events of the afternoon, from discovering Karen and her friends in my jacuzzi to Brutus's dramatic intervention. Sarah listened intently, her eyes widening with each detail. When I finished, she burst out laughing. "You're crazy, George," she said, "but I love it." That's exactly what she deserved. We spent the next hour cleaning up the mess, restoring my backyard to its former state of tranquility. As we worked, I could hear Karen muttering and complaining in her own yard. She didn't dare approach me directly, but I could feel her resentful gaze burning into my back. The police never came, likely because Karen was too embarrassed to report the incident. I knew she wouldn't press charges, wouldn't want to draw any more attention to her own egregious behavior. And I didn't hear from her directly either. For weeks, Karen avoided me, and she never again sat in my jacuzzi again or looked at me any other way than with fear in her tone. Life on Willow Creek Lane gradually returned to normal. The other neighbors breathed a sigh of relief. The peace had been restored, mainly because the main instigator Karen had now been gone and nobody ever heard from her again. I hoped from now on everything would be peaceful. As for me, I continued to maintain my jacuzzi, to enjoy my sanctuary, and to live my life in peace. Brutus, my loyal protector, kept a watchful eye on the neighborhood, ensuring that no unwanted guests ever dared to trespass on my property again. And every time I saw Karen, I couldn't help but smile, remembering the look on her face as she fled my backyard, forever scarred by the wrath of George Cooper and his Rottweiler Brutus.